Hey guys, welcome back to Toy Shop. Today we're cleaning carburetors on an Arctic Cat ZL550. Alright, so first thing we got to do is we got to take everything off of the carburetor that's attached to it. For the most part, we're probably going to leave the overflow tubes on here, but there's a throttle safety switch that's plugged in here that we're going to have to unplug. There's the slide cap right here that we're going to have to take off. There's a fuel line, so let's get all of that stuff off of this carburetor first. You want to be gentle when you're pulling all this apart because you don't want to bend the needle that's on the bottom here. I'm just going to lay it up over top of the head out of the way so that it is safe. We got the throttle safety switch out of the way. Alright, so I got everything off of this except for the choke, and we're going to take the choke off once we get the carburetor out of here. So I'm going to grab a Phillips head and I'm going to get this clamp broke loose, and then we're going to get the carb off. Don't be afraid to back these way off. I hold my finger in the back side to feel where the end of the bolt is. I usually take the end of the bolt and run it up flush with the nut that's on it. Now, there's this rubber boot between the carburetor and the airbox. We're gonna kind of push that off and kind of fold it. So that kind of came all apart at once. The airbox boot pulled out as I rolled the carburetor out of the boot and the motor, which that is fine. That will go right back in there. We're just gonna set that out of the way. Now we got this carburetor where we can see this choke plunger. So we're gonna grab, it looks like a 12, I think. We're gonna get this broke loose, and then we get the carburetor out. Now, this choke plunger here will come apart pretty easy, and there's two things you can do. You can either take the plunger off of this, the plunger and the springs, so you don't lose them, or you can just turn the choke on, full choke, and that will hold enough tension on there that it shouldn't come loose. But let me just make sure everything's tucked up out of the way. Now I'm gonna do the same thing for that carburetor in there, and I'll meet you back on the bench. All right, so we got both carburetors set on the bench now. Before I clean any carburetors, usually what I wanna do is I wanna get a clean surface to work on. And usually I'll do 4 shop rags. Usually I'll tear everything apart down here on the bottom one, put all the jets and everything for that carburetor up in the square right above it. And you want to keep the carbs separate. You also want to make sure that the carb that you pulled off goes back in the same hole. So what I'll do is I'll keep them separate. I rope clutch on this side, flywheel on this side, so I know which carburetor goes where. Usually I'll tear one all apart, kind of do them together, but for the video we're just going to go through one, so just do the same thing for both carburetors. Just make sure you keep them separate, and let's get at it. First thing you want to do when cleaning a carburetor, once you get it off, you want to get the outside clean before we start tearing into it. This carburetor's filthy, so I want to make sure that the outside carburetor is clean, so as we're going through and cleaning it and handling it, we're not getting dirt from the outside on parts that should be clean on the inside. So let's get these cleaned up. All right, got this thing cleaned up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull all the vent lines off and get them set off to the side. Now this one's got a little parts washer cleaner in it still from when I just cleaned it out. So I'm just gonna hold this upside down in the garbage can, try to get it cleaned out a little more. Then we're gonna take the float bowl off. All right, so this carburetor has a little bung here on the overflow. So we're gonna pull that off first. Hopefully it doesn't make a huge mess. All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to take these 4 Phillips head screws off the bottom. All right, now we're going to pop the bowl off. Ew. All right, now we got the float bowl off. We're going to start by taking the float fingers off and getting the needle and seat out of this. All right, I'm going to set that over to the side. So if you look on this, there's a little metal clip on here that holds the needle inside the seat. We're gonna pop that off quick. All right, now that that's out of the way, I'm gonna grab the needle out. Now this seat is a 9mm. All right, so underneath the seat, there's a little steel washer and 2 little fiber washers. You wanna make sure the steel washer's in between it, but we're gonna have to clean those up. All right, now we're gonna get the main jet out. That's a 6mm. All right, so we're gonna set that down. emulsifier tube fell out of the bottom once I got the main jet out of it. So we're going to set that off to the side. Now we've got the pilot jet down in here, which is just a small flathead. Alright, now that's it for jets inside the float bowl. Now there should be an air screw on this. So there's a little screw right here on the intake side, the airbox side, that makes it an air screw. So what we need to do is we need to count how many turns out it is by screwing it in. So we're going to go 1/2, 1, like roughly 1 1/4 turns. So before we forget that, we're going to write that down. All right. So now that we know how many turns out it is, we're going to unscrew it. Should be the screw and then a spring, and that is it. So now we've got this carburetor pretty much gutted. We are going to take this to the garbage can and we're going to start hosing it out with carburetor cleaner. All right, so pretty much everywhere that we pulled a jet out of, we want to make sure we give her the beans with the old carburetor cleaner, and don't hold anything back. Even some of the holes that we didn't pull anything out of. And now we're going to blow it out with air. So we got the carb body all cleaned up. And one of the dirtiest parts on this is the float bowl. It looks like somebody threw up in there. So what I'm going to do for this while we're waiting is I'm going to stick this overflow bung on it. And then I'm just gonna start spraying some carburetor cleaner in there, and I'm just gonna let it soak. So how I like to do it is I like to get the carb body clean first and then go through and start cleaning all the components. And as I get each one clean, I start putting it back in the carb body. So you could go through and clean all of these at the same time and then just reassemble the whole thing at once. But all right, so the first thing I want to do is the main jet in here stuck in this piece that threads into the emulsion tube. So what I want to do first is get this broke loose, because I really got to get all this chalky stuff off of here. All right, so these are the pieces. This is your main jet right here. So we're going to make sure we get all this cleaned up, scrubbed up. I'm probably just going to spray it off the carburetor cleaner and wipe it off with a rag and blow it out with a hose. And for the main jet, I'm going to run a wire down through it just to make sure there's nothing hard plugging anything. And then we are going to work on the emulsion tube. That thing. Alright, so I got all 4 of these here cleaned up, which all 4 of those go together. So we are going to assemble these 4 parts in here. Alright, I don't know if I can show you on camera, but right here on this side, there's a little brass pin that sticks out, and on our emulsion tube, there's a groove cut in it right here. So we got to make sure that groove is lined up with that, and then we have to hold that up in there so we can start putting these 3 things back on the top to hold it in there. So this can be a little tricky. So you want to make sure it's lined up pretty good before you push it all the way down in there. I'm off just a little bit and it stopped, so. All right, so I got that down in there. Now I'm gonna kind of hold that in there while I get this bottom piece threaded on. Don't want to kill them, they're just brass. Just want to snug them up. Now this little cup goes in the same time the main jet goes in. So we're gonna get that started in there, and we're gonna kind of probably grab the socket and start it with the socket. Now we're going to snug that up. So now the next thing I'm probably going to clean is the pilot jet right here, and we're going to stick that in this hole over here. Alright, so we got that cleaned up, so we're going to drop that down in the hole. Make sure your screwdriver's clean too, because you don't want to be stuff falling off your screwdriver as you're tightening it up. Alright. Now probably what we're going to do is we're going to do the needle and seat assembly. Now this one's pretty nasty. So I'm going to take some carburetor cleaner and a rag and wipe off these 3 washers here and set them off to the side, and then we're going to get started on the seat. Alright, so to clean the seat out, take some steel wool and you kind of twist it up so it's pretty close to the same size as your seat. I'm going to stick it down in there, and we're just going to spin and spin and spin and spin. We're just going to polish the inside of this so the needle has a nice clean surface to seat against. If you don't do this, then you get it all back together and put fuel to it, and it's going to leak all over the floor. Alright, I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's nice and shiny now. Alright, so we're going to set that off to the side. I'm going to take our little needle. There's a little spring pin on this side here. Make sure that's not locked up. We're going to get this cleaned off too. And then this little steel clip that came off of the seat that held the needle in, we got to get that cleaned up too. So what I'm using to clean up the outside of a lot of this stuff is this little wire brush right here. I'll post a link down in the description, but it's a super fine wire brush. This is just a cordless die grinder. But what I'll do is take something that's got some crap on the outside of it, and I'll take it and just lightly go over it, and it takes all the scale and nasty stuff off of it and makes it look like new again. So I definitely recommend this for carburetors. It's nice to get all this brass stuff looking like new again. Alright, so we got all these parts right here cleaned up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the needle, stick it back down in the seat. We're not going to snap this little clip on it yet because the socket won't fit over top of it with it on there. And then what we're going to do with these three little washers is we're going to stick one fiber washer on first, and then a steel one, and then another fiber one. We're going to take this, we're going to start screwing it into the carb, get that snugged up. Alright, now we can pop this little metal clip back on over top of it, and voila. Now the needle and seat assembly is together. Now I'm going to get this pin and these float fingers cleaned up so we can get that back on there. And then we are going to go get the float and we're going to get that cleaned up. Okay, so if you don't remember which way these went, there's an easy way to cheat, because there's usually a nice shiny little dot on that, and that side goes down up against the needle. So that's a pretty decent way to cheat. So we're going to stick that down in there. We're going to get the pin in. Make sure it's all the way in there. You want to tap it in, but you don't want to kill it, because you don't want to break one of these aluminum towers off, because then the carburetor's junk. So you just want to make sure that head's in there flush, which I got a little more to go on that, but then that's it. So we're gonna go get the carb bowl. Alright, so I let it soak, kind of help loosen everything up. I want to get these floats out of here, but there's these little plastic caps on top, so we're gonna get those slid off, and once they pop off we can just grab the float and pull it right up out of there. Alright, now I got some room to work in here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a flathead screwdriver and kind of scrape all this heavy, nasty stuff off of it. And then we're going to spray it out with carburetor cleaner. And then we're going to take this little bung right here. We're going to stick a flathead screwdriver in there and just kind of disturb everything down in there. Blow it all out. Get these cleaned up. And then this will be ready to go back on that. Alright, so with lots of scrubbing and scraping and a little wishful thinking, we got this thing cleaned out halfway decent. So now what I want to do is I'm going to wipe off these floats, and it's hard to screw it up because it says up right here, and it doesn't matter if it's left or right. So we're going to stick up on each side, and then these little plastic caps just snap right back over the top. Alright, so now we have a float bowl. So we are going to take this and we're going to put it right back over top of these. Now on this one, all the overflow holders were on the motor side, so I'm going to stick those two back where they came from. And now for this little doodad thingamajigger. This actually holds fuel that is part of your float bowl. It's not an overflow. So if you ever wanted to drain the bowls on your carburetors, if you could reach this, then you would just pop this off, and then all the fuel is going to drain out of your bowls. So I'm going to stick this back on here, stick the clamp back on, and then we have our air screw. So I'm just going to put a little carburetor cleaner on a rag, and we're going to wipe this off. All right, we're going to slide the spring over top of it, and we're going to start threading it into the hole. I'm going to thread it in until it gets snug, and then we're going to back it out our 1 1/4 turns. All right, so that's snug. So we're going to go 1/2, 1, 1 1/4. All right, so now that air screw should be set right where it was, and we have a done clean carburetor. All right, so once you get that far, you're going to want to do the same thing to the other carburetor. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put this clutch carburetor back on just so I can show you guys. But what we do to this side also will work with the other side. So the very last thing we did is we pulled the choke out. So what we want to do is get the choke started back in here and get this snugged up. All right, now that that's in and snugged up, what seems to work pretty good for me is you take your boot that goes into the airbox, and you take it and you shove it on top of your carburetor, like way too far. Because when it's all said and done, we want it about in there. What I'm going to do is just shove it way too far on. That'll help give us a little extra room. So I'm going to snake it down in there until I get this end right here kind of lined up. And then I'm going to kind of fold this end, and I'm just going to twist it in there. All right, so now this side here is popped in, and all we have to do is we're going to push that boot off a little bit, and we're going to work this split inside that airbox. And it goes in halfway decent. You kind of get it started on 1/2 of it, then you can kind of rotate it around to the side that isn't in yet. Kind of push that in, spin it a little farther, push that in again. You just kind of keep working it around and around and around till you get this snapped in there all the way. Now we're going to tighten up this clamp, put our fuel lines back on, rehook up our throttle sensor here, and that's pretty much it. Hopefully this helps you guys, and it'll get you back out on the trail. All right, guys, as always, I hope this helped. Why don't you guys check out another video over there. But until next time, peace.